Damon, thank you for joining me.
Pleasure, John. I'm intrigued to see what you're going to ask me.
I've been a fan of you all my life. You know, I'm 47, so I watched you racing, followed your career. And of course, you've been on Sky Sports F1 until literally, end of last year. So
Right.
I'm genuinely interested in this conversation. But tell me in your own words, who is Damon Hill?
There's Damon Hill, who a perception you have and a perception that maybe people out there have. And then there's the person I know and the person that my family knows. And they'll all have their own take on who you are. And the only way you can relate to people is on the basis of their knowledge of you. I know about myself that I am a certain way in certain situations, and sometimes I'm happy with that, and sometimes I'm not happy with that. But I also recognize I have limitations, so I would like to be a much better guitarist. I know I can't. It's too late, if I've started when I was 3 or something like that.
But it's a passion.
But it's a passion. So there are things that you realize you can't do. So if you're young and you're going into a situation, there's probably lots of situations where you're not sure of yourself, but you'll find certain situations where you're more comfortable and you're better at. And that is sort of your guide, is to follow those directions, because it will be an easier path. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try the things you're uncomfortable with. And then you do this thing called growing as a person, where you're more capable in a variety of situations. And that should be a goal, I think, for people. Well, I'm not lecturing, hopefully, but
No. It's like an evolution, actually, what you're describing there. And the Damon Hill that I have only watched on, if you like, the TV screens as a Formula One racing driver, winning the 1996 World Championship, fighting Michael Schumacher many times through your career, but also fighting probably all sorts of thoughts, demons in your head, even into sort of battles within your own team, to then being 12 years, I think you said, as a Sky Sports F1 presenter, pundit. That's the perception that I've got, but actually you've just ultimately filmed a documentary. And so that's going to give so much more of an insight into Damon and the journey you went on, the life that you've led, but then ultimately sort of becoming, to this conversation, what's coming next. And that's the bit I'm really interested in. What made you make the documentary? Why was it the right timing? Why did you choose the production company you used with Simon and Vic?
So Simon Lazenby is the lead presenter on Sky, along with Natalie Pinkham, who they basically the people who link the guests like me to the audience, and also get us through the ads and stuff like that. So I worked with Simon, got to know. So I had no experience of media and television and all this stuff before I went to Sky. I mean, apart from being the subject of an interview,
which I never felt you particularly liked as well. It's quite an interesting transition to then join them, if you like.
I found it irritating would be the wrong way to put it, but I just felt like I don't like being put in the position where I'm being inquisition, where I'm being the subject of an inquisition.
And then you join them and you're doing it.
Yeah, but that's why I also wasn't comfortable about being the inquisitor as well. So I prefer this kind of free-flowing conversation where you've got a chance to explain what you really mean, rather than the short, punchy thing. But anyway, getting back to Simon. So I worked with Simon, and he was looking at ways to expand his experience of sport. And so he went and produced some documentaries on other sporting people, and put together, so became a producer. And one of the early plans was to do one on myself, and then it kind of took ages to get going and put the pieces together, but we finally got there. And I must say, anybody who sits down and watches a documentary, and even if it's an hour and a half long, you have no idea the amount of work that goes into putting that together.
Archives of
unbelievable
different ways you could do it as well. Like, it's a really interesting perspective. It's through literally through your eyes, right? There's no other contributors. It's a very
well. I want to make it clear. I did not direct this. It never got any instruction. I totally trusted Simon.
Trust is the word.
Yeah.
Right? But I guess you built that relationship up through years of working and being very closely together, lots of traveling together, lots of time together.
Yeah. So there's an element of knowing someone and knowing that I think that Simon wanted to give it the best shot. But he also then had to trust, because he handed over to Alex Holmes, who was the director of the film, who had his own vision. So I think letting go of control, something to do with you, is extremely scary. And a lot of people want to spend a lot of their time, if they're famous, controlling every aspect of their personality. I'm actually interested to know, I'm more interested to know what other people would make of me, given that they've got free reign to go through my home videos, archive stuff of me in the sport. And so what conclusion would they come to? And that's what I think we've got with this film documentary, is that it's an aspect of me. Is it completely me? No, it doesn't show me ranting on the golf course when I've done some stupid shot. It doesn't show me frustrated and, annoyed about everything to do with the world at the moment. It doesn't show that, but it's definitely got a ring of truth to it. It's got the kernel of me in that. And what I was doing during my career, I wasn't just trying to win a race. I was trying to, like everybody, build a home, create security for the family, all those other things that hopefully other people will relate to.
Yeah, whilst being away from your family on weeks at a time, and a high intensity for focus and, I guess, competition, if you like. So that takes all your focus. There's nothing else you can think about when you're behind the wheel of an F1 car, other than just literally what's in front of you. And then
the good drivers are able to think
well,
of other things.
Coming from a world champion. And I think that's a key thing there. It's like how important and how much of a motivation was it for you when you came into Formula One, with your father being a previous world champion, the history that goes with that, the pressure, and the fact that your father tragically was killed early, in his life, and in terms of your years, to then want to kind of almost have that Hill legacy. I want to win the world championship. How much did that drive you?
Well, I think that's partly an inquiry in the film, is to what is the motivation, what would make you want to push yourself through these trials and challenges. What was the influence of having a father that then tragically died, as you said, so he wasn't around to help me, and the issues to do with what is that a father-son relationship is, stuff like that.
You've got no guidance. And there are times, and this is probably a reflection of how we had this chat when I first was talking to you then outside, watching you at times on the screen, and then having had the pleasure to watch the documentary myself. There's an element of you being alone, and we know from the documentary, let alone as history says it, you were very alone in that Williams team, and you still managed to win the world championship. I'd love to know what was going on in your head, and how you dealt with the fact that there were so many people against you. You didn't have a father to talk to. Yes, Georgie, the family were there, but sometimes you were on your own. Did you, that mental strength is huge, and you won the world championship in 1996.
Part of the test with something like sport is that you are going to be put to the test. You're going to be challenged. It's a bit like being a politician. They're supposed to be public servants, and they're supposed to be challenged on everything and quizzed on everything. And one thing that kind of slightly surprised me was that with the British press at the time was that they weren't supportive, and I thought that was their job. But of course, their job is to write a story. And so one of the things that I could have had explained to me if I'd had someone like my dad around is that that's not how it is, son. That's not how the world really works. So I had to learn on the hoof as I went, and I sought advice from various people, and those people did help. So, but I wasn't really ready for it, and it was also quite late on in my career. So it was, you think you'd be able to do that, but once you're in that situation, you haven't got time to do the research. It's happening all around you straight away. And I fell into a few potholes, a few traps, man traps along the way. But I had to learn from that experience. So I think that's a good example of how, a painful experience is a good opportunity.
Resilience, which makes you a better version of yourself. But in the time, especially when you're learning on the hoof and in full view, like, huge media coverage, and high profile, because you're always ultimately at the sharp end and fighting for a championship.
So one example I give is that when I was driving, I thought the journalists and the TV coverage and the fans and everyone could see right through me.
You
I
felt
felt very
transparent.
exposed. I felt transparent. And the questions you get from journalists and so forth, I just thought they seem to know. I thought I was going paranoid. I thought I was actually over concerned about their insights and stuff. And I was, but you read a small line about yourself and how you behaved and everything by a piece in the newspaper,
Overanalyze it.
and you kind of go, they spotted me. Do you know what I mean? They spotted something that I also feel uncomfortable about. And I felt very exposed, and I thought that I was exaggerating. And then I started working with Sky, and I realized they really are analyzing everything you say and everything
There's a
you
proper
do.
science to it.
There's a science to it, and there's what trousers he got on, and how is he walking, and all these kind of really intrusive observations. What did he really mean by that? Did you notice that when he said that, he stopped himself and then he changed his mind and then covered up? So that degree of scrutiny is real. And after a few years of doing it with Sky, or maybe the first year, I realized if I'd had this training before I went in, I would have been much better prepared for my career. And I would say, advise anybody going into any public activity to understand the level of scrutiny you will be under, because you need to have a wall, not to hide behind, but to protect you from literally the feeling that you're being stripped apart. And every little tiny molecule is being analyzed, because it's extremely unsettling.
They're trying to find a weakness as well. And of course, you're in a competitive environment, and so I'm interested to know your thoughts on fast forwarding to the 2025 season, if you like, where there are drivers all competing against each other, but there's so much that's out there with Drive to Survive and social media, and they're showing their emotions. They're giving information away to competitors. Whereas in this instance,
Yeah.
you had to, you probably realized you were being everything extracted from you. You're feeling vulnerable, so you close off. So that puts it all in here, which we know now with the whole mental health journey. That's the voices in your head and how you came through that, because that could have crushed many, many people. But not only did you come through that and be successful, winning multiple races and again the '96 championship, but you sort of never let it get you down. Have I got that right, or did you have moments where you went into the trailer and you put your head in your hands and you let it out, or did you just keep it?
Completely. I mean, you have to, when you've got a lot of attention on yourself, and then you have to walk into the paddock, knowing that the moment you get out of your car in the car park, you're going to have cameras, people following you and watching everything you do and say, is a trial. So you do have to have a strategy for dealing with that. And in those days, we didn't have social media. Now there's pros and cons of social media. One of the pros is nowadays, if you have a point you want to make, you can put it out there in social media. You can control that narrative a little bit. You have a way of responding. So in those days, I didn't have, unless I wanted to do the only way would be to do an interview with a journalist, a written, piece.
That was literally the only vehicle,
That was
wasn't
the
it?
only vehicle. And then it was mediated by the editor and the journalist. And so you're constantly frustrated because you're going, they've not got what I really meant across. So now you've got that little bit of a string to your bow as a personality. So Lewis, for example, will manage his communications and can do so on his own. So they're adept now. They have to be, because they have to be adept. The power they have to communicate is huge, and possibly, even greater. The drivers have even greater power now through that medium than anyone else in the sport, really.
Feels like it.
Yeah. So they've now got a huge responsibility, because they have to think carefully before they open their mouths on social.
That makes me think of some of the stuff that's in the press right now. For context, filming very much the end of January 25 with a season coming up and reflecting on 24. A lot of radio messages, particularly from Max Verstappen, where he's openly swearing and criticizing the team and acting about it. Is there a bit of a lack of respect that's crept into the sport, with sort of decisions being made that are more entertainment based?
Yes. Well, you mentioned Netflix. I mean, Netflix is a drama. And it's revealing as well, because you said it shows behind the scenes. And I think that is valuable, because it shows someone going, going home to their apartment after a bad weekend. You know,
that never happened, right? There was
No,
a
no.
level of intrigue, which I think was quite nice as well. But we didn't know what Damon was doing outside of a race weekend.
Yeah, I think it's well, there would have been stuff that was done, but it would be a very staid or kind of formulated thing that would be for a sponsor or something like that. You didn't have the control of it. But anyway, Netflix will follow you to your local restaurant or getting up to whatever you get up to away from the track, which I think humanizes and brings the fans closer to those people as understanding them as people. This Netflix thing is
Entertainment.
yeah, it's the communications you were talking about. Well, there is a question as to whether or not people are doing stuff because they know it's going to be broadcast.
That's what I'm thinking. Which
and
tapped into the social media, things going viral for all the wrong reasons, but it's clickbait.
I mean, Fernando, definitely. Fernando's incredible. If you know Fernando he makes me laugh because he's so smart and he knows that if he says something during a race, it's going to have an effect. Sometimes he did it unwisely and it damaged his career. But he will come up with things because he knows it's being broadcast. It's not just going to his engineer. Whether Max's attacks to his race engineer is something that he'd be proud of after the race, I'm not sure.
And in future years as well, because he's still so young. There's drivers on the grid now that, I mean, you said it yourself, he came into the sport relatively late, relatively in context of some of the kids coming through.
16, 17?
And so actually, you can be quite forgiving.
He was 16, I was 32.
Double, literally. It's like, you know, and so there is an element, and because without going off track, you know, the people that are giving him the advice, namely his father as well, equally aggressive, equally kind of, so actually it's like, oh, but he's performing. He's been winning from the minute he got in the car.
Well, Jos has said that he's, you know, he understands his son is honest, he's direct, he's being himself, he's authentic, and he's proud of him. And I totally get that, and I would be proud of my son too, what he's done. And Matt perhaps wouldn't be proud of him talking to anybody sometimes in the way he does, but you can excuse that, say it's in the heat of the moment, it's a race. But anyway, we're getting slightly off the track, but what we're touching on is the scrutiny that even you can win 4 world titles, you can win 9 world titles. You are not going to be immune to criticism. It's not an issue of, it doesn't silence all the critics. As far as your driving goes, probably that's enough. You know, that's all we know. But we're not only interested in how many races you win. We're just not. That's human nature. We are social creatures. We are interested in you. Whereas there's a passage in the Iliad where Odysseus goes and he lands on an island, and I can't remember which the name of the people are, but he lands there and they have to find out who he is, because in those days you'd be a stranger. They need to know, well, where do you come from? Are you just a forward emissary of something greater that we need to be concerned about? You know, they need to know everything about you, and your story of yourself is taken very seriously, and they will put it to the test. They want to know whether what you say about yourself is borne out in actual fact. They'll ask you to perform certain tasks to see if you're, you know, if you go in somewhere and say, oh, I can juggle, and they go, okay, then show us. You know, so point is that the Netflix thing has opened up the human side of the sport, as is all reality TV in a way. You know, it's made people interested in the behind the scenes. The problem with it is that if you show the workings, it's like being a magician. You know, you don't want to know how the trick is done. Somewhat in some way,
the illusion itself is
I mean,
compelling.
Do we really want to know who Bob Dylan is?
What it has done is it's got my wife watching it and countless people that weren't, which is exactly what, you know, Liberty Media and F1 wanted, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, whereas I guess purist fan of the sport and countless people around me, you know, we're not necessarily watching it, which is quite an interesting dynamic.
It's a little bit like, what is the value of a celebrity? Some people are famous for just being famous. We want the sport to have the essence of it to be authentic, an authentic test of skill and prowess.
Yeah.
And if it is now rewarding those who are able to keep the viewer watching all their other stunts that they get up to, and they get signed up by a team because they've got a massive media following, because they're entertainers, I'm uneasy about that, because I think whilst I want characters in the sport, you know, the sport is founded on extraordinary individuals, whether or not they're able to hold an audience. I mean, if you were to put Jim Clark in this context, you wouldn't get much out of Jim Clark. And maybe he'd warm up, maybe he'd change, maybe be a different person.
Yeah, you always can't compare. He wouldn't know what on earth a smartphone was and so on. But yeah,
Yeah, and Fangio is famous for not speaking English, so you hardly got anything out of Fangio. But he's regarded as being
his name's
the greatest of all time.
and we have these conversations all the time of who is the greatest, and there's a really good example of why you can't even compare. But I'm going to completely contradict myself now and ask you, who is the name that comes as the GOAT, the greatest of all time, when you ask that question?
Well, I think there's a bunch of them, and I'm not evading the question. I just don't think you can compare era to era.
I agree with that.
I think you could break it down into decades, and you could say, maybe it was Fangio in the 50s and Clark in the 60s, and maybe Stewart in the 70s and 80s. Starting to struggle now, but yeah, I mean, who would it be? Villeneuve. Someone would say Villeneuve, but I would say Prost, possibly, 80s and 90s, Senna, maybe worse. So there we go. I mean, there's a bunch of people, the usual suspects.
I love the fact that you said Villeneuve.
Right.
I love it. I was brought up around stories of him being sideways, and when he trashed his car and insisted on driving it back to the pits, and then kind of when that added up the crew, like, come on, and they're like, literally hasn't got any wheels left on.
If you come back a little bit slower,
back out.
Yeah. So this is where you get into the enjoyment of the sport.
That's the emotional human side of it as well, right?
Some people love that. Some people love the thinking driver, like the Lauda
and the Prost, I guess. Yeah. With coming back to you and almost that kind of right back in that moment, trying to win the World Championship, winning the World Championship in '96, and the documentary. Did you enjoy your time in Formula One? You would have been so ambitious and driven to get there. All the decisions and all the things that happened for you to get there, and then it's almost like, did you actually then come out of it only to then kind of almost realise what you achieved, because it's so intense. There must have been so much pressure on you, and you came in so quickly. Did you actually have a moment where you went, "I'm enjoying this," and just take that moment?
Loads of them.
Good.
Loads of them. I mean, I would say most fulfilling and enriched time of my life was probably in Formula One. Very difficult to compare a life outside or find a life that is comparable. The getting there was always, I was blinkers on, and my friends will confirm that. I was going to Formula One. I was going to get there somehow, and so when I stopped, it was I liken it to being, those people that you see at the circus who are fired out of a cannon. You're shooting down a barrel, and then suddenly you're flying through the air, and you're going, "Whoa, where am I going now?"
What was that like then? Because that's a whole identity thing, and you reached the pinnacle as well. So not only did you have ambitions and aspirations to get into Formula One, but you'd have always had eyes on the championship. And you achieved it, and then when you ultimately retired, identity crisis. I know that was a really tough time for you mentally. What got you through that?
Well, partly I brought it on myself consciously, because I saw people going out of Formula One and straight into some other massive project that kind of tied them up and kept them involved. And I just thought, it's been such an intense few decades that I really want I want to know what happens to you when you don't have anything to do, when you don't have a deck full of stuff you've got to take care of. And I had money in the bank. I could, the kids were grown up, well, were growing up, they were quite young. So I could spend time at home, do random stuff. And for me, it was a very valuable window of nothing happening, where I could explore.
Complete opposite to previous as well, right?
Yeah, extreme way. But that's it. That comes back to this question of identity, who you are. Imagine you would say to someone, "Okay, I'm going to give you £1 billion, right? You can do whatever you like.
You do not need to do anything."
Yeah. So you have to spend it, but you can do whatever you like. If you're given every opportunity, it's more difficult in some ways than having no opportunity. I mean, Napoleon, I think it's Napoleon quote, which is to have a choice is a luxury. So
it creates its own problems.
And
right?
People agonize over which route to take when they can, where shall I go on holiday? What job shall I go for? And that's a real challenge, because actually you shouldn't be looking at what's out there. You should be trying to find out what's inside that's telling you what gives you fulfillment. And then it raises a whole load of other questions, which could be to do with, well, maybe it's not what you want. Maybe it's what other people want. And if you can
Very
do something for
unselfish
them,
way of looking at it.
yeah, that's a reflection, leads to directions that may have not been obvious to you before.
No, and in the moment, fight or flight, probably back to Formula One and so on, and the mindset and just and the dedication and to achieve a goal. When you've ultimately come out of that, and then fast forwarding right to now, what do you do to kind of prioritize your mental and physical health? When you were training physically as a Formula One driver, you have a goal to be as fit as you can to beat your rivals, but you still look fit. You look content in your eyes. So I'd love to know what you're actually doing to look after yourself and what that kind of purpose is now.
I think it helps having a discipline. I think it helps having something which means that I need to put on the back burner whatever it is. So
Prioritize.
you're in effect not in denial, but you're in effect not dealing with those issues, because you're creating a thing that overrides all the other considerations. So let's say you have a problem in a relationship. That can't interrupt my direction. Sorry, but that is now that's not a problem, because I've got to get to a racetrack and win a Grand Prix. So you're not working on things that perhaps need more attention, because you can defer everything. And so then, of course, you take away the imperative, which is an event, something you've agreed to do. You've got a contract. I will turn up. You can't not turn up. So, and anyway, you want to turn up. But then you suddenly go, okay, well, now I can't ignore the other things that needed attention, that didn't want to be distracted by.
Yeah, that's focus, right?
It's focus, but is it healthy focus? I mean, a lot of people may go, oh, I can't think about that. No, I've got to go to work, or I've got to, and so, but all the time it's nagging away in the background and undermining their it's undermining people's fully invested nature of what they do. Because if you ask an artist, why do they do what they do? It's because they don't know any different. They
creative as well.
Yeah,
they're stimulated by creative.
Don't ask me why I'm playing with clay. I feel like I want to play with clay, or write music, or something.
And then the journey goes. So here's an interesting one for you, because you clearly had a lot of success throughout your life, and that the answer to this question would have completely been different at different phases. But right here, right now, how do you define success? What does it look like for you?
I think someone asked me this not so long ago, and the answer I gave was that I defined success by my own criteria, not by other people's criteria. And I found that an issue the whole way through my career, is that people would be pushing me, egging me to do what they wanted me to do. And I think Lewis is like that. I think Lewis is quite content to set his own ambitions, his own agenda, and to hell with everyone else's expectations and desires. Because if we do that, we tend to want to own someone's success, and we go, and they imagine that if we were that person, we'd be doing this. So, for example, I mean, I don't want to be a spoil sport or anything like that, but I never really turned up in flash cars and did all that stuff.
I know.
I know that people want you to live the dream. They want you to have, countless girlfriends or whatever it is. They love to do that themselves, probably. But if it's not you, then
you're not being true to yourself.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I like your answer. And what's next for you? So you've you've sort of hung the microphone up. The Formula One career is behind you, and that kept you in Formula One. Are you going to still have an involvement? Are you going to enjoy that kind of distance and break? Have you got eyes on other things?
No, I think you can't escape Formula One. I think it's everywhere you go. Everywhere I go, it seems to follow me around. I can't seem to escape it. I'm fascinated.
Do you embrace that then?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a time when I wanted to get away from it. I'd had enough of it, and I didn't like what I was seeing on the track and in the politics of the sport. I don't think that'll ever change. I think there's always going to be controversy, which is either annoying, frustrating, or entertaining. So that's
All at the same time.
I think, you know, I'm very lucky that my heart has been around my life since I was born. I mean, you know, Sterling Moss came to my christening, you know, so it's like
Amazing.
there is no escape from this thing.
No. So how will you say, or is that a chapter that's not written yet, or are you already
It's not
making
written yet,
stuff?
so I don't know. I've got people wanting me to do various bits and bobs, but as I said to you before, what is it that I want to do? And that's the question I'm trying to answer now, I suppose. And then I can put energy in that
Yeah.
direction.
Sounds like the guitar needs to feature in that.
Well, then you tell, yeah, the guitar only features in my world. It's not something
No, I get it.
for public consumption.
And that's important as well, right? We need to have that.
Yeah.
So I'm just conscious of, it's again, end of January. So we've got no data, no information on the 2025 grid and how the cars are going to be. What's your prediction for who's going to win the championship?
I don't know.
Isn't that quite nice?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the rules that they came up with naturally condense the grid and make it more difficult for the ones who have got an advantage to get further away. So it's like you're climbing up a hill, and if you're ahead of everyone, they keep putting more stuff in your rucksack.
Yeah, load up some lead in the front of the car. Yeah.
So the guys at the back should be catching up.
Yeah.
And I think this is good. I think that was a good decision.
Let's both call it. I mean, you know, you've got to name someone. I'll lead and say probably a bit with my heart, Lando Norris.
Mm-hmm. Oh well.
McLaren ended on a high.
Yeah.
And Max obliterated the first half of the season and then, you know, fell away. But
I think it would be a foolish person who discounted Max.
I agree with that.
He seems to get results like Michael Schumacher did. He'd get results out of nowhere.
Yeah.
With lesser equipment.
Yeah.
He's in that. He's really in the purple patch in his abilities, and probably going to get stronger as well. Lewis, you have to say, is getting on for last chance saloon with Ferrari. It's not impossible, and I certainly would be delighted if he got his 8th title, the one that he should have got.
There's a bit of justice, kind of. I think a lot of people are in that camp. I am. It's like it's deserved, and would love to see it happen. And I'm hopeful for him as well. But we've got no information. We'll find out next few months, right?
I think it's no good hankering after Abu Dhabi. It's not going to come back. It's too difficult to unravel that sort of thing. So we are where we are.
Can I ask you a personal question on that? Actually, you were in the pit lane during that, and there was a real injustice. There was a real kind of feeling of, you know, and if you understand the sport, you know, Max comes out on fresh tyres and Lewis doesn't, and there's 2 laps left, and they blatantly sped the whole process up to have that, and it's set up where Lewis just, you know, if it kept Max behind, it would have been a miracle. Was there Adelaide 94 where an injustice that was in plain sight, where Michael Schumacher ultimately drove into you and damaged your car and you couldn't finish when you would have won the championship? Was there a bit of emotion that came out through watching it, or did you manage to control that?
Did I manage to control my emotion?
Yeah, because you're watching someone else go through something, and you've got to be impartial, your opponent, but there's an element of, this guy's being robbed. And I might be being controversial saying this, but that's how I felt in 94 watching you, and you're now in the pit lane at the heart of it, getting all the data and information going, this doesn't look fair.
You know, we have sports, they have to make decisions. Sometimes a call goes the wrong way and the umpire's got it wrong. But it's happened. I mean, you know, hand of God, you know, blowing the whistle when they too late, when they then gets a goal. You know, do we want to lose the 1966 world champion or something like that? World Cup. I think that it's human. Sport is human, and I think refs are human. And I think there's always a reason why something happened the way it did, and you need to learn from that and try to ensure it doesn't happen again. And this is going to upset people, but it is only a sport. You know, there are a lot worse things that happen that shouldn't happen. So we do need to get a little bit of sense of perspective on it.
Especially coming from someone that's had something like that happen. I think that's really, really mature, really, overarching view.
I wouldn't want it if someone said to me,
it sounds like
if someone says to me, okay, we've looked at it again and we think you should be world champion. I don't want it. I don't want to win like that. No. I don't want to win like that.
It's in the past.
It's what the story of what happened in 94 was. It happened exactly the way it should have happened.
So you're totally at peace with that.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
I can feel that by
lost it, and so the whole season was tragic. You know, it was complicated, tragic, and intense. And I think you can say the same about 21 when, you know, it was very intense. And there is a reason for things happening the way they happen. There is something which is you have some consolation in the knowledge that it wasn't you that did something wrong.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And you're part of
It wasn't-
history that gets talked about a lot. So there's a positive in that.
You got to
Like,
do the right thing.
there's
So that-
seasons that no one talks about.
yeah.
94 gets talked about. It brings emotion out. It brings pub conversations, all sorts of emotional conversations.
But it's ultimately it's not going to change anything.
No.
So I mean, you know, if you know the umpire's decision, we have to have someone. You enter into sport and you're going to go, here's the rules. These people are going to make decisions. You have to accept them or not. It's no good standing at the crease going, that's not fair. It's not right. I'm not leaving.
Sure.
We don't want to see that in cricket, do we?
No, I get it.
I mean, if a umpire is repeatedly making the wrong decision, that's another issue.
No, absolutely. That's a problem that needs to fixing, which I think is a conversation we're having in Formula One at the moment about the stewards and the rule making and so on, the consistency. But I've been looking forward to this conversation. I've then thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you have too. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Very
talking
good.
to you.
I'm sorry if I went on too long.
Not at all. And when does the documentary come out? When can we all watch it?
No, it was going to be March. Now it's May, I believe.
May.
So yeah,
No.
and so you'll be able to have a look and see what we think.
So well, I've been lucky enough to see it, so I know how good it is. And thank you for making time to talk to me today, Dan.
Yeah,
Thank you.